The crash of breaking glass woke me at midnight, and before I could process what was happening, red and blue lights were flooding through my bedroom window. 2 officers stood at my door, their faces grave in the porch light. The younger one, a woman with dark circles under her eyes, kept glancing back at her partner like she was about to deliver news she couldn't quite stomach. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, her voice steady but soft. "There's been an accident. We need you to come with us." My hands started shaking before my brain could catch up. John. Something happened to John. The drive to the morgue was a blur of streetlights and the rhythmic thump of my heart against my ribs. But when they pulled back that sheet, when I saw his face peaceful in a way it hadn't been in years, the female officer touched my shoulder and whispered, "I'm so sorry." That's when I noticed it, the thing that would unravel everything. She wasn't looking at John's body. She was looking at me with something that looked like pity mixed with knowledge, like she knew something I didn't. But let me back up. Let me tell you how I got to that morgue in the first place. Because this story doesn't start with death. It starts 3 months earlier with a marriage I thought was solid. 3 months before that midnight, I was sitting at our kitchen table in our modest Phoenix home, sorting through bills like I did every Sunday morning. John was already at the office, even though it was the weekend. He'd been doing that a lot lately, disappearing into his work, coming home with that distant look in his eyes. We'd been married 26 years. 26 years of building a life together, raising 2 kids who were now in college, maintaining the kind of partnership that everyone in our church community admired. John Patterson, the respected accountant. Mary Patterson, the devoted wife. We fit together like pieces of a puzzle that had been assembled so long ago, we'd forgotten what the picture was supposed to look like. The bills that morning seemed higher than usual. I remember staring at the credit card statement, trying to figure out why our grocery expenses had jumped by $300 in a single month. I wasn't buying anything different. Maybe inflation. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention? I made a mental note to ask John about it later, then filed the statement away in our home office. That's what I always did. File it away. Trust that John, with his accounting degree and his meticulous nature, had everything under control. I loved our Sunday routine. After bills, I'd make a pot of coffee and sit on our back patio, watching the desert sun climb higher in the sky. Our house wasn't fancy, but we'd worked hard for it. A 3-bedroom ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood where everybody knew everybody. John had always handled the finances. It made sense, didn't it? He was the numbers guy. I was the people person, the one who organized church bake sales and remembered everyone's birthdays. We had our roles, and they worked. Or so I thought. That particular Sunday, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the bills. It was the way John had been acting, this distance between us that felt like it was growing wider every day. When he came home that evening, I tried to bring it up casually. "Hey, do you think we should look at our budget? Things seem tight lately." He barely looked up from his phone. "It's fine, Mary. I've got it handled." That phrase. I'd heard it 1,000 times over the years. I've got it handled, and I'd always believed him. But here's what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known. While I was sitting on that patio drinking my coffee and trusting my husband, John was sitting in his office creating a separate financial reality. He'd been diverting money from our joint accounts into a secret account I didn't even know existed. Not large amounts at first, just enough that I wouldn't notice. $50 here, $100 there. Over the course of 3 years, those small diversions had added up to nearly $70,000. $70,000 that should have been securing our retirement, padding our savings, giving us the cushion every couple our age needs. Instead, it was sitting in an account with only his name on it, an account he'd opened using an address I'd never heard of. The kicker, he wasn't even spending it on anything exciting. No gambling problem, no secret mistress with expensive tastes. He was just hoarding it, building his own private nest egg while I clipped coupons and bought store-brand cereal to save money. The first real crack in my perfect picture came 6 weeks before the morgue. I was at the grocery store, same store I'd been shopping at for 15 years when my debit card was declined. I felt my face flush hot with embarrassment as the cashier handed it back to me. "Do you have another card?" she asked, her voice neutral but her eyes sympathetic. Behind me, I could feel the line of other shoppers growing restless. A baby started crying. Someone sighed loudly. The fluorescent lights overhead felt too bright, too exposing. I fumbled through my wallet, found our credit card, and that one went through fine. But my hands were trembling as I loaded groceries into my car. The parking lot was scorching hot, typical Phoenix summer afternoon. I sat in my car with the air conditioning blasting, but I couldn't stop shaking. That had never happened before. Never. We weren't rich, but we'd always had enough. I'd been shopping at this store for 15 years, knew most of the cashiers by name, had never once worried about having money to pay for groceries. And now this. This public humiliation. This sign that something was very, very wrong. When I got home, I didn't even bother putting away the perishables. I left the bags on the kitchen counter and called the bank immediately. The representative, a young man with an overly cheerful voice that grated on my nerves, put me on hold 3 times while he looked into my account. Each time, I listened to that tinny hold music and felt my anxiety ratcheting higher. Finally, he came back on the line. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm showing that your checking account is currently overdrawn by $417. "That can't be right," I said, my voice shaking. "There should be at least $2,000 in there. My husband's paycheck was deposited last week." There was a pause, the sound of typing. "I see that deposit, yes. But there have been several large withdrawals since then. Would you like me to go through them?" He read off a list of withdrawals I didn't recognize. ATM withdrawals in parts of the city I never went to, downtown addresses near John's office, some in neighborhoods I'd never even heard of, transfer payments to accounts with numbers I'd never seen before, cash advances that made no sense. Each item on the list felt like a small betrayal, adding up to something much larger. "Ma'am," he said gently, and I could hear the pity in his voice. "Has anyone else had access to your account?" My mouth went dry. "My husband," I whispered. "Only my husband." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. The bank representative had probably had this conversation before, probably recognized the pattern. Woman calls, confused about missing money, realizes her partner has been taking it. It's a story as old as time, and I'd become just another chapter in it. The phone call lasted another 20 minutes, but I don't remember most of it. I remember the sound of my own breathing, shallow and fast. I remember the way my hand cramped from gripping the phone too tight. I remember asking the representative to repeat himself 3 times because I couldn't process what he was saying. Unauthorized transfers. That's what he called them. But they weren't unauthorized, were they? John had full access to our accounts. We'd set them up that way when we first got married, back when we were young and naive and believed that marriage meant complete transparency. Back when I thought that kind of trust was romantic rather than dangerous. After I hung up, I sat in my car in our driveway for almost an hour. I couldn't make myself go inside. The house that had always felt like a sanctuary suddenly felt contaminated, like every room held secrets I hadn't noticed. The garage door opener sat in my hand, and I just stared at it, thinking about how easy it would be to press that button, drive back out, and keep going. Where would I go? I had no plan, no money of my own, nowhere to run. That's when the reality of my situation really hit me. I'd made myself completely dependent on a man who was stealing from both of us. When I finally went inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked through each room like I was seeing it for the first time. The living room with furniture we'd picked out together 15 years ago. The kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals. The bedroom where we'd shared a bed for over 2 decades. Everything looked the same, but it all felt different. Tainted by the knowledge that while I'd been building our home, John had been building an escape route. When John came home that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table with bank statements spread out in front of me. Not just from that month, but from the past 6 months, I'd requested them all, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Patterns. Systematic patterns of money being moved, hidden, redirected. "We need to talk," I said when he walked in. He looked at the papers and something flickered across his face. Not surprise, not guilt, irritation. "Mary, I told you I handle the finances. This is exactly why. You don't understand how money works." His tone was condescending, the same tone he might use with a child who'd wandered into an adult conversation. "I understand that we're broke," I shot back, and my voice cracked. "I understand that my card got declined today at the grocery store. Where is our money going, John?" He sighed, this long, dramatic exhale like I was inconveniencing him. "The market's been tough. I've made some investments. They'll pay off. But right now, things are tight. I need you to trust me." And here's the thing that kills me, that makes me want to scream at my past self. I did. I trusted him. Because that's what 26 years of marriage had taught me to do. I want you to understand something about the kind of person I was then. I grew up in a generation where women were taught that a good wife supports her husband, doesn't question him, keeps the peace. My mother had stayed with my father through thick and thin, and they'd made it work for 50 years. That was my model. That was what I thought love looked like. I remember my mother's advice on my wedding day. She pulled me aside in the bridal suite, adjusted my veil, and looked me in the eyes with this serious expression. "Marriage isn't always easy, Mary," she said. "There will be times when you want to walk away, but a good wife stays. She supports her husband through the hard times. That's what commitment means." I nodded, believing every word. I was 23 years old, about to marry my college sweetheart, and I thought I understood what she meant. But what she didn't tell me, what maybe she didn't know herself, was that there's a difference between supporting someone through hard times and enabling them to abuse you. There's a difference between commitment and complicity. And by the time I learned that distinction, I'd wasted decades. So when John told me to trust him, even though every instinct in my body was screaming that something was wrong, I swallowed my doubt. I apologized for overreacting. I told myself that he was under stress, that the economy was hard on everyone, that marriages require sacrifice and patience. I told myself all the lies that women of my generation were taught to believe. I see you, sitting there listening to this, maybe yelling at your screen. "Leave him, Mary! Open your eyes!" And you're right to yell. But love isn't blind. It's something worse. It's paralyzed. It sees the danger, but can't move away from it, because moving feels like giving up, like admitting failure, like breaking a promise you made before God and everyone you know. And there was something else, something I'm almost ashamed to admit. I was afraid of what people would say. Our church community, our friends, our neighbors, they all saw us as the perfect couple, the Pattersons, solid, stable, committed. If I left John, if I admitted our marriage was a fraud, what would they think of me? Would they blame me for not trying hard enough? Would they whisper behind my back at church? Would I become that cautionary tale, the woman who gave up too easily? The sacrifice I made wasn't just about money, though that was devastating enough. It was about time. Years of my life that I poured into making our home perfect, into being the ideal partner, into ignoring the growing pit in my stomach that told me something fundamental was broken. I'd given up my own career aspirations to support John's. Back in our early years, I'd wanted to go back to school, maybe become a teacher. But John convinced me we couldn't afford it, that we needed my income from my secretarial job to stay stable, that maybe later there would be time for my dreams. Later never came. Instead, I spent my days managing a household, volunteering at church, and telling myself that this was enough, that I was enough. Every time doubt crept in, I pushed harder. I took on more responsibilities. I organized more events. I smiled wider. I convinced myself that if I just loved him enough, worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, everything would balance out. That's what we're taught, isn't it? that women are the fixers, the healers, the ones who hold everything together through sheer force of will. The weeks following that bank statement confrontation were strange. John became more affectionate, bringing me flowers, taking me out to dinner at our favorite Italian place. It felt like the early days of our marriage, and I wanted so desperately to believe we were turning a corner. "I'm sorry I've been distant," he told me over candlelight and cheap Chianti. "Work has been overwhelming, but you're right. We need to be more transparent about our finances." He showed me some papers, investment statements that looked official and impressive. Numbers that meant nothing to me, but that he explained with such confidence. "See? We're building for retirement. It'll all be worth it." I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored the voice in my head asking why. If we were building for retirement, my debit card had been declined at the grocery store. I ignored the inconsistencies in his explanations, the way he changed the subject whenever I asked specific questions. I ignored everything except the hope that our marriage could still be saved. But you can only ignore reality for so long before it forces itself on you. That moment came at a backyard barbecue at our neighbor Tom's house. It was one of those perfect Phoenix evenings, the kind where the heat finally breaks and you can actually enjoy being outside. John had gone to get us drinks, and I was standing by the grill talking to Tom's wife Sandra about her daughter's wedding plans. That's when Michael approached me. Michael was John's best friend from college, a guy he'd known for 30 years. They'd been roommates, stood up at each other's weddings, the whole deal. I'd always liked Michael. He had this gentle, honest quality about him. But that night, he looked different, nervous. He'd been drinking. I could tell by the slight sway in his stance, and he kept glancing around like he was checking to see if anyone was listening. "Mary," he said quietly, "can we talk for a minute?" We stepped away from the crowd, into the darker corner of Tom's yard where the citrus trees blocked most of the patio lights. Michael took a deep breath, and I could see him gathering courage like a man about to jump off a cliff. "I can't keep doing this," he said. "What are you talking about?" My heart was already starting to race. "John," he said, and his voice cracked. "The money. I know where the money is going. I've known for almost a year, and I'm so tired of watching you walk around like everything's fine when it's not." The ground seemed to shift under my feet. "Tell me," I whispered, and he did. He told me about the secret account John had opened, about the systematic withdrawals, the careful planning, the way John had been building his own private financial safety net while telling me we needed to tighten our belts. Michael had found out accidentally, had seen some paperwork when he visited John's office for lunch. He'd confronted John about it, and John had sworn it was temporary, that he was trying to protect our assets, that he'd tell me soon. But soon never came, and Michael's conscience finally got the better of him. "You deserve to know," Michael said, his eyes wet. "You've always been good to him, Mary. Better than he deserves. And watching him lie to you while you're struggling, it's just wrong." I stood there in Tom's backyard, listening to the sounds of laughter and conversation from the patio, and felt my entire world restructure itself. Everything I'd believed, every excuse I'd made, every doubt I'd suppressed, it all came rushing back with perfect clarity. Michael's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. "I took pictures," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "of the documents I saw. I didn't know if I'd ever have the courage to show you, but I couldn't delete them either." He showed me images of bank statements, account numbers, transfer records. Each one felt like a punch to the gut. The dates went back years. 3 years of systematic deception laid out in black and white on a phone screen in the middle of a neighborhood barbecue. "How much?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "When I saw it last month, it was close to $70,000, Michael said. He looked physically ill, like the act of telling me was making him sick. "Mary, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner. I just kept hoping John would do the right thing, that he'd come clean on his own, but he never did." I felt disconnected from my body, like I was floating somewhere above the conversation, watching it happen to someone else. This couldn't be my life. This couldn't be my marriage. We were the couple that other couples looked up to. We were solid. We were stable. We were a lie. "Does anyone else know?" I finally managed to ask. Michael shook his head. "Just me, and now you. John swore me to secrecy, said it would destroy you if you found out, but keeping his secret while watching you struggle, it's been eating me alive. I couldn't do it anymore." I wanted to be angry at Michael for not telling me sooner, but I couldn't muster the energy. All my anger was reserved for John, for the man who'd promised to love and cherish me, who'd vowed to share his life with me, who'd spent 3 years systematically building a financial wall between us. I don't remember much of the rest of that night. I know I thanked Michael. I know I somehow made it through the rest of the barbecue without crying, without screaming, without letting anyone else see that my marriage had just imploded in a neighbor's backyard. John drove us home, chattering about something work-related, completely oblivious to the fact that I was sitting next to him plotting his financial destruction. When we got home, I told him I had a headache and went straight to bed. But I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through 26 years of memories and seeing them all through a different lens. Every time he'd told me not to worry about the finances, every time he'd dismissed my concerns, every time he'd made me feel like I was being irrational or overly emotional, it had all been manipulation, careful, calculated manipulation designed to keep me in the dark while he built his exit strategy. Because that's what that secret account was, wasn't it? An exit strategy. Insurance in case our marriage didn't work out. A way to make sure he'd be fine even if I wasn't. The next morning, I waited until John left for work. Then I did something I'd never done before. I went into his home office, that sacred space he'd always asked me to respect by not disturbing his filing system, and I started searching. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Evidence, I guess. Confirmation. Something concrete that would prove Michael right and my gut instinct correct. It took me 2 hours, but I found it. A folder tucked in the back of his filing cabinet, behind tax returns from 5 years ago. Inside were bank statements for an account at a bank we didn't use. An account opened 3 years ago with an initial deposit of $5,000. An account that now had a balance of $68,743. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped the papers. I sat on the floor of his office, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, and I let myself cry. Not delicate tears, but ugly, body-racking sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. But here's what happened in that moment of complete devastation. Somewhere between the crying and the hyperventilating, something in me shifted. The paralysis broke. I stopped being the woman who trusted blindly and became the woman who trusted herself. I took pictures of everything, every bank statement, every transfer, every withdrawal. I documented it all on my phone, uploaded it to a cloud account he didn't have access to, and carefully put everything back exactly where I'd found it. Then I called a lawyer. Not our family lawyer, not anyone in our circle who might tip John off. A divorce attorney whose ad I'd seen on a bus bench, of all places. Her name was Rita, and when I walked into her office that afternoon with my folder of printed evidence, she took one look at my face and said, "Let me guess, financial infidelity?" I nodded, unable to speak. "You'd be surprised how common this is," Rita said, flipping through the statements. "Or maybe you wouldn't. 1 in 10 older Americans experiences some form of financial abuse. The difference is, most of them don't find out about it until it's too late to do anything." Rita explained my options with a clarity that felt like a lifeline. I could confront John and hope he'd cooperate in dividing assets fairly. Or I could build a case, protect myself legally, and ensure he couldn't hide or move any more money before we separated. "What would you do?" I asked her. She looked at me with these fierce, knowing eyes. "I'd protect myself first. Make sure you have your own accounts, your own credit cards, your own resources. Don't tell him anything until you're ready to move forward. Men like this, they're good at talking their way out of things. Don't give him the chance. That conversation woke something in me I didn't know had fallen asleep. I'd spent so long being accommodating, being understanding, being the good wife who didn't make waves. But I was done drowning to keep someone else afloat. The first thing I did was open my own bank account at a different bank. I rerouted my part-time job's direct deposit, the small income I made doing bookkeeping for a local nonprofit. It wasn't much, maybe $800 a month, but it was mine. Then I applied for my own credit card, in my name only. When it arrived in the mail, I hid it in a box of tampons under the bathroom sink. John would never look there. Next, I started quietly documenting everything. I kept a journal of every conversation we had about money, every time he dismissed my concerns, every inconsistency in his explanations. I noted dates, times, exact phrases. I became a detective in my own marriage, gathering evidence for a trial John didn't even know was coming. The strange thing was, he didn't notice any of it. He was so confident in his control, so sure I'd never question him, that he didn't see the trap closing around him. Living with that knowledge, pretending everything was normal while preparing for war, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I'd wake up next to him every morning, make his coffee, kiss him goodbye when he left for work, and the whole time I was calculating. How much was in that secret account now? How much had he taken this week? What was my move? The pretending took a toll I hadn't anticipated. I'd catch myself in the mirror and not recognize the woman staring back. My face looked gaunt, older. There were new lines around my eyes, a permanent furrow between my brows from constant worry. I stopped sleeping well, waking up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, my mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. What if John moved all the money before I could stop him? What if there was more hidden than I'd discovered? What if I ended up with nothing? I lost weight, dropping 15 pounds in a month without trying. My clothes hung loose on my frame. My wedding ring, which had fit perfectly for 26 years, started sliding around on my finger. I'd twist it absently, thinking about all the promises those rings were supposed to represent, for better or worse, in sickness and health, till death do us part. Had any of it ever been real? My neighbor Sandra, the one from the barbecue, stopped me one morning when I was checking the mail. "Mary, are you feeling okay?" she asked, genuine concern in her eyes. "You just seem different lately, thinner, tired." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to grab her hands and pour out the whole sordid story, to have someone validate that I wasn't crazy, that what was happening to me was real and wrong and devastating. But Rita's voice was in my head. Protect yourself first. Don't tip your hand. Once people know, the secret is out. And John would find out. So I smiled, that practiced smile I'd perfected over the years. "I'm fine," I said, "just fighting off a cold. You know how it is." She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. "Well, if you need anything, I'm right next door. Really. Anything." The kindness in her voice almost broke me. I nodded, afraid that if I tried to speak again, I'd start crying and wouldn't be able to stop. The lies we tell to survive, right? But I wasn't just lying to Sandra. I was lying to everyone. To our church friends who asked about John and me with that knowing, invasive concern that church people have. "You two seem a little distant lately," one woman said after Sunday service. "Everything okay?" Everything was not okay. Everything was catastrophically not okay. But I smiled and said we were fine, just busy with work. I lied to our kids when they called from college. Emily would ask how Dad was doing, and I'd say he was great, working hard, same as always. James would tell me about his classes and his girlfriend, and I'd pretend my world wasn't imploding. I couldn't bear to burden them with this. Not yet. Not until I knew what I was dealing with. And I lied to myself every time I got into bed next to a man I no longer knew. I'd lie there in the dark, feeling the warmth of his body next to mine, and think about all the nights we'd shared this bed, all the conversations we'd had, The dreams we'd planned, the life we'd built together, or thought we'd built together. Because now I understood that while I'd been building a partnership, he'd been building an escape route. Some nights John would reach for me, his hand finding mine under the covers, and I'd let him hold my hand even though my skin crawled at his touch, even though I wanted to scream and pull away and demand answers. I'd lie there, hand in hand with my betrayer, and count down the days until I could be free. 6 weeks into my secret investigation, I was sitting in the parking lot of the grocery store staring at my phone, trying to work up the courage to do what needed to be done. I'd drafted an email to John, short, direct, devastating. In it, I laid out everything I knew, the secret account, the transfers, the timeline of his deception. I'd attached copies of the bank statements, highlighted the most damning evidence, and ended with a simple question. What else don't I know? My finger hovered over the send button for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Once I sent this, there was no going back. Our marriage would be over. The life we'd built, the facade we'd maintained, all of it would crumble. But it was already crumbled, wasn't it? I was just finally acknowledging the ruins. I hit send. The whoosh of the email leaving my phone felt like the sound of a door slamming shut on everything I'd known. Then I drove home, walked into our house, and waited. John came home 3 hours later. I heard his car pull into the driveway, heard the familiar sounds of him entering through the garage. He walked into the kitchen where I was sitting at the table, my hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea I'd made hours ago and forgotten to drink. He looked different, smaller somehow. The confidence that usually surrounded him like cologne was gone. "We need to talk," he said, and I almost laughed at the irony. "Yes," I replied, "we do." He sat down across from me, and for a long moment, we just stared at each other. This man I'd loved for 26 years. This stranger who'd been stealing from us both. "How did you find out?" he finally asked. "Does it matter?" I shot back. He looked away. "I was going to tell you. I just needed more time to figure out how to explain it." The audacity of that statement. The sheer, breathtaking audacity. 3 years, John. You had 3 years to explain it. Instead, you let me think we were broke while you built yourself a safety net. He tried to defend himself. They always do, don't they? He said he was protecting us, that he wanted to make sure we had security, that he was planning to surprise me with the money for our retirement. Every word felt like another betrayal, another lie stacked on top of the mountain of lies he'd already told. "You don't get to do this," I said, and my voice was shaking but strong. "You don't get to make unilateral decisions about our future and call it protection. You stole from us, from me." "I never stole," he insisted. "It was our money. I just moved it to an account only you could access, with planning and intention and secrecy. That's theft, John. That's betrayal." We went in circles for hours, him making excuses, me refusing to accept them. Eventually, he got angry. That's when the mask really came off. "You're being irrational," he said, his voice rising. "I made one mistake, and you're ready to throw away 26 years? What about for better or worse? What about our vows?" I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the tile floor. "What about them? You broke them first." The silence that followed was deafening. John's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, calculation, desperation. I watched him like you'd watch a stranger on the street, with detachment and a strange curiosity about what he'd do next. "Mary, please," he said, and his voice shifted to something pleading. "We can work through this. I'll close the account. I'll give you full access to everything. Just don't throw us away." "Throw us away?" I repeated, and I felt something hot and bitter rise in my throat. "There is no us, John. There's you and your secrets, and me and my ignorance. That's not a marriage, that's a performance." He reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled back like he'd burned me. The gesture felt manipulative, calculated to trigger my sympathy. but I was all out of sympathy for him. "I need you to leave," I said quietly. "What?" "Leave. Go to a hotel, go to Michael's, I don't care. But I can't be in the same house with you right now." "This is my house too," he said, and there was an edge to his voice that I'd never heard before, something dark and possessive. "Then I'll leave," I said, standing up. "But one of us is going tonight." I walked past him to our bedroom and started pulling clothes out of the closet. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I could hear John following me, his voice rising as he tried different tactics. Anger, then pleading, then cold logic, then anger again. "You're making a huge mistake," he said from the doorway. "You'll regret this." I turned to face him, a suitcase half packed on our bed between us. "The only thing I regret is not doing this sooner." In the weeks that followed, we existed in this strange limbo. John refused to move out. I refused to back down. Rita filed the paperwork for legal separation, and we began the process of untangling our finances. John fought me on everything, every asset, every account, every piece of property. It was exhausting and expensive and soul-crushing. But I had something he didn't. I had the truth, and I had proof. The secret account became the centerpiece of our case. Rita argued that John had committed financial fraud against the marriage, that his systematic hiding of assets demonstrated a pattern of deception that invalidated any claim to those funds. The judge agreed. In the preliminary hearing, John was ordered to freeze the secret account and provide full financial disclosure of all his assets. He was furious. I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt everything, and it had all blended into this white-hot core of determination that kept me moving forward when all I wanted to do was collapse. My ally through all of this, believe it or not, was Sandra from next door. After the initial separation, I finally told her everything. We were sitting on her back patio, drinking wine that was probably too expensive for a Tuesday afternoon, when I just broke. "My marriage is over," I said, "and I don't know who I am without it." Sandra reached across and took my hand. "Want to know something?" she said. "My first marriage ended for almost exactly the same reason. Financial infidelity, secret credit cards, hidden debts. I thought I was the only one stupid enough to let it happen." We talked for hours that day. She told me her story, and I told her mine. And in that sharing, I found something I'd been missing. Community, understanding, the knowledge that I wasn't alone in this particular hell. Sandra's first marriage had ended 12 years ago. Her ex-husband, Mark, had been a charming real estate agent who'd seemed to make good money. But he'd been secretly running up debt on credit cards she didn't know about, taking out loans in both their names without telling her, leveraging their home for business ventures that never materialized. By the time she discovered it, they were $300,000 in debt. "I had to declare bankruptcy," she told me, refilling our wine glasses. "Lost the house, my credit was destroyed, had to start over from nothing at 40 years old. But you know what? Best thing that ever happened to me. Because I learned who I was without him. I learned that I was strong enough to rebuild." Her story terrified me and inspired me in equal measure. I was facing financial devastation, but maybe there was life on the other side of it. Sandra introduced me to her support group, women who'd been through divorces or separations or betrayals of various kinds. They met every Thursday night at the community center, and I started going. At first, I just listened, hearing other women's stories, realizing how common financial abuse was, learning that my experience wasn't unique. Did you know that in 15% of elder abuse cases, there's some kind of power of attorney abuse involved? I didn't. I thought I was special in my suffering, but I wasn't. I was just one of many. Those Thursday night meetings taught me something crucial. Victims of financial abuse often isolate themselves, either through shame or through their abuser's manipulation. John had been so good at making me feel like I was the problem, like my concerns about money were unreasonable or paranoid. But sitting in that circle of women, hearing them describe the exact same tactics, the same gaslighting, the same financial control, I realized I'd been in an abusive relationship and hadn't even known it. The abuse wasn't physical, There were no bruises, no police reports, no dramatic incidents that would make someone say, "Get out now." It was subtle and insidious, and wrapped in the language of protection and responsibility. And it had been happening for years. 3 months after I sent that email, 3 months of legal battles and sleepless nights and discovering new lies almost daily, I got the call. It was midnight, and I was in bed, still awake because I hadn't slept well since all of this started. My phone rang with an unknown number, and when I answered, a woman's voice said, "Mrs. Patterson, this is Officer Martinez with the Phoenix Police Department. There's been an accident." The drive to the morgue is still a blur in my memory. I remember the female officer, Martinez, sitting in the back seat with me, her hand on my shoulder. I remember pulling up to the building, those harsh fluorescent lights that make everyone look half dead already. I remember walking down that hallway, my footsteps echoing on the linoleum. The smell of antiseptic and something else I couldn't identify. They led me into a cold room where a body lay under a white sheet. When they pulled it back, I saw John's face. He looked peaceful, younger than he had in years. The lines of stress and anger that had marked him in recent months were gone. He'd been in a car accident, they told me, single-vehicle collision, lost control on a curve, hit a tree going 60 miles an hour. He died instantly, they assured me, like that was supposed to be comforting. But I wasn't looking at John anymore. I was looking at Officer Martinez. She was staring at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Not sympathy exactly. Something knowing. Something that made my skin prickle. "Mrs. Patterson," she said quietly, "we need to talk to you about something we found in the vehicle." They took me to a small office, offered me terrible coffee that I didn't drink. Martinez sat across from me with a folder, and I recognized the look. It was the same look Rita had given me when I first showed her the bank statements. "Your husband had files in his car," Martinez said. "Financial documents. We're required to report them because they show evidence of potential fraud." She showed me papers I'd never seen before. Another account, this one with over $100,000. Life insurance policies I didn't know existed, with beneficiaries that weren't me. Investment accounts that had been liquidated and moved. "How long have you been aware of your husband's financial activities?" she asked. I told her everything. About Michael's revelation, about my investigation, about the pending legal separation, about the secret account and the lies and the systematic betrayal. Martinez nodded like she'd heard this story before. "You need to know something," she said. "This accident, it's under investigation. Your husband's blood alcohol was 3 times the legal limit. He'd been at a bar for several hours before the crash." She paused, and I could tell she was choosing her words carefully. "We found a note in his wallet. It's not a suicide note exactly, but it suggests he was under significant stress. Given the circumstances of your separation and the pending financial disclosure, we're treating this as potentially deliberate." The room spun. John hadn't just died in an accident. He might have killed himself, and he'd done it right before he would have been forced to reveal the full extent of his financial deception. "Did he know how bad it was?" I asked. "Did he know he was going to lose everything?" Martinez looked at me with those knowing eyes. "Based on the documents we found, yes. He was about to be exposed for significantly more than what you discovered. There are business partners, investors. It's complicated." She pulled out more papers from the folder. "Your husband had been embezzling from his firm for the past 2 years. Small amounts at first, but it escalated. The partners were conducting an audit. They'd scheduled a meeting with him for the day after his accident to confront him about the missing funds. We're talking about nearly $200,000. I felt like I was falling, even though I was sitting perfectly still. $200,000. The scope of his deception just kept expanding, layer after layer of lies I'd never suspected. "There's more," Martinez said gently. "We found communications between your husband and a woman named Jennifer Chen. She worked at his office. The messages suggest they were having an affair. She was also one of the beneficiaries on those life insurance policies. Every word was a new wound. It wasn't just financial betrayal. It was everything. Our entire marriage had been a fiction, and I'd been the only one who didn't know it. I sat there in that sterile office, drinking terrible coffee and learning that my husband's betrayal went deeper than I'd ever imagined, and I felt nothing. No grief, no anger, just this vast emptiness where 26 years of marriage used to be. The aftermath of John's death was chaos. The legal separation became a probate case. The hidden accounts became part of an estate that had debts I didn't know existed. Business partners emerged claiming John owed them money. Creditors came out of the woodwork. It turned out that the $100,000 account Martinez showed me was already earmarked for debts, the life insurance policies with different beneficiaries. Invalid because he'd changed them without following proper procedures. The man had been drowning in financial secrets, and his death didn't solve them. It just transferred them to me. Rita fought for me every step of the way. She argued that I shouldn't be responsible for debts I didn't know existed, for business deals I'd never agreed to. She protected the house, my retirement account, the modest savings I'd managed to keep separate. But it took months. Months of hearings and depositions and financial forensic accounting. In the end, I kept the house and about 40% of what should have been our combined retirement savings. Everything else went to pay off John's debts and legal fees. But here's the thing, they don't tell you about betrayal this deep. It doesn't just affect your finances, it affects your body. I started having panic attacks in grocery stores, my heart racing every time I handed over my debit card, terrified it would be declined. The first time it happened, I was buying milk and bread, simple staples. But when the cashier rang up my total and I reached for my wallet, suddenly I couldn't breathe. The store felt too hot, too bright, too crowded. My vision tunneled. My hands shook so badly I dropped my debit card twice before I could swipe it. The cashier looked at me with concern. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need to sit down?" I shook my head, unable to speak, just desperately hoping the card would go through. When it did, when that receipt printed out confirming the transaction had been approved, I felt a wave of relief so intense I almost cried right there at the register. I started avoiding that grocery store, then other places where I had to use money. I'd put off shopping until we were completely out of essentials, and then I'd go to different stores, hoping the change of scenery would help. It didn't. The panic followed me everywhere. I developed insomnia so severe that my doctor prescribed sleeping pills. But even with medication, I'd lie awake for hours, my mind spinning through everything I'd lost, everything I'd never had, all the lies I'd believed. I'd finally fall asleep around 4 in the morning, only to wake up at 6 feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. I lost 20 pounds I couldn't afford to lose because my stomach was in knots, so often I couldn't eat. Food lost all appeal. The smell of cooking made me nauseous. I'd force myself to eat a piece of toast or some crackers, just enough to keep functioning. Friends commented on how thin I'd gotten, saying things like, "You look great. What's your secret?" I'd smile and say I'd been stressed. If only they knew. My hair started falling out in clumps. I'd wake up to find strands all over my pillow, watch it swirl down the shower drain in alarming amounts. One morning, I was brushing my hair and a whole chunk came out in the brush. I stood there staring at it, this tangible evidence of what stress was doing to me, and I finally broke down. The stress was literally destroying my body. My immune system crashed. I caught every cold, every virus that went around. Headaches became constant companions. My jaw ached from clenching it in my sleep. My shoulders were permanently hunched, tensed against some invisible threat. Sandra, bless her, recognized what was happening and dragged me to her doctor. The doctor took one look at me and started asking questions. About my sleep, my appetite, my stress levels. I tried to downplay it, but she wasn't having it. "You're having a physical response to trauma," the doctor explained. "Your body is in constant fight or flight mode. Your cortisol levels are probably through the roof. Your adrenal system is exhausted. This is serious, Mary. You need to address it before it causes permanent damage." She ran blood tests that confirmed what she suspected. My cortisol was elevated, my thyroid was struggling, my vitamin D was in the basement. My body was literally eating itself from stress. She referred me to a therapist who specialized in financial abuse and betrayal trauma. Sitting in that therapist's office for the first time, I felt like a failure. I'd held it together through the legal battles, through John's death, through the financial chaos. I'd thought I was strong, resilient, but my body was keeping score in ways I couldn't control, and the score showed I was losing. The therapist, Dr. Chen, explained something that changed how I saw everything. Trauma isn't about weakness, she said. It's about what was done to you, not who you are. Your body is responding exactly how it should to a sustained threat. She taught me that financial abuse is abuse, period. That the gaslighting, the control, the systematic undermining of my reality had the same impact as other forms of abuse. She told me that studies show 94% of people who experience significant betrayal in relationships develop symptoms of post-traumatic stress. 94%. I wasn't weak or broken, I was traumatized. Understanding that gave me permission to heal instead of just survive. Dr. Chen helped me develop coping strategies, breathing exercises for the panic attacks, a bedtime routine to help with insomnia, ways to ground myself when I felt like I was spiraling. But more than techniques, she helped me understand that healing wasn't linear. There would be good days and bad days, steps forward and steps back. What mattered was the direction I was moving overall. In our sessions, we unpacked years of conditioning. Dr. Chen had me write letters to my younger self, the woman who'd believed John when he said he had everything handled. Reading those letters out loud in therapy made me cry every time, but it was a different kind of crying. Not the desperate sobs of devastation, but the cleansing tears of release. You were taught to defer to men, Dr. Chen said during one session. Your father, your husband, male authority figures. It's generational conditioning, and it's powerful. Breaking free from it doesn't happen overnight. She gave me homework assignments that felt revolutionary. Spend money on myself without justifying it. Make a financial decision without consulting anyone. Say no to requests without explaining myself. These tiny acts of autonomy were terrifying at first. I'd stand in a store holding something I wanted, my hand shaking as I carried it to the register, fighting the voice in my head that said I didn't deserve it, that it was wasteful, that I should put it back. But each time I pushed through that fear, I got a little stronger. 6 months after John's death, I started taking yoga classes at the community center where my Thursday night support group met. Sandra came with me to the first class, holding my hand when I almost chickened out at the door. You need this, she whispered. Your body needs to remember it's safe. The instructor, a woman in her 60s named Maria, had this calming presence that made the room feel like a sanctuary. During that first class, when we got to the final resting pose, Savasana, I started crying. Not because I was sad, but because it was the first time in months that I'd felt my body relax. Maria came over afterward and hugged me. Let it out, she said. Yoga brings things to the surface. It's part of the healing. I kept going back, 3 times a week at first, then 5. My body started to change, not just losing the panic-induced tension, but becoming stronger. I could touch my toes for the first time since I was 30. My shoulders, which had been permanently hunched from stress, started to lower. I could breathe deeper. The physical changes reflected internal ones. With each class, I felt a little more like myself, or maybe not myself. Maybe a new version of myself. Someone who had been through fire and came out forged differently. I also started walking. Every morning, I'd wake up early and walk through our neighborhood as the sun rose over the Phoenix desert. At first, it was just something to do, a way to fill the hours I used to spend cooking John's breakfast or ironing his shirts. But it became meditative. My thinking time. The desert mornings in Phoenix are magical if you catch them early enough, before the heat becomes oppressive. The air is cool, almost crisp. The sky shifts through shades of pink and orange and purple. Cactus wrens sing their morning songs. I'd walk the same route every day, watching my neighborhood wake up. And something about that repetition, that reliability, helped calm my anxious mind. During those walks, I processed everything that had happened. I grieved the marriage I thought I had. I raged at the betrayal. I forgave myself for not seeing it sooner. I made plans for the future. Some mornings I'd cry as I walked, grateful for the early hour when no one else was out to see. Other mornings I'd feel strong, powerful, free in ways I'd never felt during my marriage. One morning, about 8 months after John's death, I was walking past a house that had just been sold. The new owners were moving in, and I watched them carry boxes through their front door, laughing about something. The woman caught my eye and waved. "Beautiful morning," she called out. "It really is," I replied, and I meant it. For the first time in months, maybe years, I looked at the sunrise and felt something other than dread or anger. I felt possibility. I started cooking again, but differently. For years, I'd cooked John's favorite meals, made his coffee the exact way he liked it, kept the kitchen stocked with his preferred brands. Now I cooked things I wanted to eat. I experimented with recipes I'd always been curious about, but never tried because John wouldn't have liked them. I made elaborate salads with ingredients I'd never bought before. I tried going vegetarian for a month just to see how it felt. I bought organic vegetables from the farmer's market and spent Sunday afternoons making big batches of healthy meals to freeze for the week. Food became creative instead of obligatory, and my health responded. The weight I'd lost in stress, I gained back in muscle. My skin cleared up. My hair stopped falling out. My doctor was amazed at my next checkup. "Whatever you're doing," she said, "keep doing it. Your blood pressure is better. Your cholesterol has improved. You look 10 years younger." I felt younger. Or maybe I felt my age for the first time in years instead of feeling ancient and used up. The house, once a shrine to our marriage, started to change too. I got rid of John's things, donating his clothes and books and golf clubs. I repainted the bedroom in colors I liked, soft blues and greens instead of the beige John had insisted was neutral and timeless. I bought new bedding, threw out the old mattress we'd shared for 15 years, and got one that was just for me. I rearranged furniture, hung new pictures, claimed the space as mine. The home office, where I'd found that damning folder, became my art room. I'd always wanted to paint, but never had time or space. Now I had both. I bought an easel, paints, canvases, and started creating. Badly at first, but with increasing confidence. My paintings were abstract, colorful, emotional. Sandra said they looked like feelings given form, and that's exactly what they were. Every brushstroke was processing, healing, reclaiming parts of myself I'd lost. Financially, I had to rebuild from scratch. The settlement from John's estate, after all the debts were paid, gave me some cushion, but not enough to retire comfortably. At 52, I needed to think about my future in practical terms. I couldn't just be angry or hurt. I had to be strategic. I took a financial literacy course at the community college. Walking into that classroom on the first night, surrounded by women of all ages in similar situations, I felt both embarrassed and strangely empowered. The instructor, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia, who'd started the course after her own financial awakening, didn't judge. She taught. "Financial abuse relies on keeping victims ignorant," she said during the first class. "But ignorance isn't permanent. You can learn. And learning is power." Me, the woman who'd let her husband handle everything for 26 years, learning about compound interest and diversification and retirement planning, learning about credit scores and asset allocation and the difference between a Roth IRA and a traditional IRA. I took notes like my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. It was empowering in a way I hadn't expected. I realized I wasn't stupid about money. I'd just been kept ignorant deliberately. The technical terms that John had used to confuse and dismiss me, I learned them. The investment strategies he'd claimed were too complicated for me to understand. I mastered them. Once I understood the basics, I was actually pretty good at it. I started actually enjoying the process. There was something deeply satisfying about understanding my own financial situation, about being able to look at a bank statement and know exactly what every line meant, about being able to make decisions about my money without asking permission or second-guessing myself. I met with a financial advisor, a woman Rita recommended, who specialized in helping women rebuild after divorce or widowhood. Her name was Linda, and she'd been through her own financial betrayal years before. That shared experience made her not just competent, but compassionate. Together, we created a plan. We spread out all my financial documents on her conference table, everything I had left after paying John's debts, and we built a roadmap for my future. I'd work part-time for another 10 years, maximizing my retirement contributions every year. I'd live modestly, but not miserably, finding a balance between saving for the future and actually enjoying the present. I'd rebuild my credit, pay off the remaining debts, create an emergency fund so I'd never again feel the panic of not having money when I needed it. "You're going to be okay," Linda told me during one of our meetings. "Not rich, but stable, independent, safe. And that's worth more than all the money John hid." She was right. I'd be okay. The support group on Thursday nights became my anchor. Those women, they understood in ways my old church friends couldn't. We'd all been betrayed in different ways, but the core wound was the same. Someone we trusted had violated that trust, and we were rebuilding ourselves in the aftermath. We celebrated each other's victories, the small and large. When Sandra's divorce was finalized and she got the settlement she deserved, we all cheered. When another woman, Janet, confronted her daughter's husband about stealing from her, we held her hand through it. When I got my first painting into a local gallery show, they showed up on opening night with flowers and champagne. We became family, the chosen kind that shows up when blood relatives don't know what to say. The bond between women who've survived, there's nothing quite like it. A year after John's death, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went to therapy with my kids. Both of them had struggled with their father's death and the revelations about his financial deception. My son, particularly, felt betrayed. He'd idolized John, wanted to be like him, and learning that his father was a fraud had shaken his whole identity. My daughter was angry at me for not leaving sooner, for not protecting myself better. Both reactions were valid, but painful. In family therapy, we talked through everything. I apologized for things I couldn't have known to prevent. They apologized for blaming me for their father's choices. We cried together, really cried, maybe for the first time since John died. And we started to rebuild our relationship on honesty instead of the careful fiction we'd all maintained to keep the family peace. My son told me he was going to therapy individually to work through his feelings about masculinity and what it meant to be a good man. My daughter told me she'd started standing up to her boyfriend when he tried to make financial decisions without consulting her. "I learned from watching you, Mom," she said. "Not the old you, the one who went along with everything. The new you, the one who fought back. I didn't know whether to be proud or heartbroken that my suffering had taught them something valuable." My son, James, opened up about something during one of our sessions that broke my heart. "I keep thinking about all the times Dad gave me advice about money, about being responsible, about being the man of my own household someday. And it was all bullshit. He was lying the whole time while pretending to teach me how to be honest." The therapist, a gentleman named Dr. Morrison, helped James see that his father's failures didn't have to define his own path. "You get to choose what kind of man you want to be," he said. "Your father's actions showed you what not to do. That's valuable information too." My daughter Emily had her own struggles. "I feel so stupid," she said in one session, her voice thick with tears. "I watched you struggle for years, Mom, and I never questioned it. I just assumed Dad knew what he was doing because that's what we were all taught to believe. You were a kid, I told her. It wasn't your job to police your father's behavior. But I'm not a kid anymore, she said. And I almost let the same thing happen to me. Brad wanted to open a joint account last year. Wanted to handle all our finances because he's better with numbers. I almost said yes because that's what I saw growing up. That's what seemed normal. The fact that my daughter had almost replicated my mistakes terrified me and motivated me in equal measure. Breaking generational patterns wasn't just about healing myself. It was about giving my children a different model to follow. 18 months after John's death, I went on a date. Sandra set me up with a friend of her brother's, a retired teacher named Robert who liked hiking and NPR and had kind eyes. I almost canceled 3 times. The idea of trusting a man again, of being vulnerable, of potentially being hurt, it terrified me. But Sandra wouldn't let me back out. You don't have to marry him, she said. Just have coffee. Practice being open to possibility. Robert and I met at a coffee shop near the university. He was nervous too, I could tell. We talked about safe things at first, our kids, our work, our favorite books. Then, about an hour in, he said something that changed the conversation. I should probably tell you I'm a widower. My wife died 5 years ago, cancer. I'm still figuring out how to be a whole person without her. His honesty cracked something open in me. I'm a widow too, I said. But it's complicated. My husband, he betrayed me financially for years. I didn't find out until we were separating, and then he died before we could resolve any of it. So I'm grieving and angry and relieved and guilty all at the same time. Robert didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He just listened. Then he said, "Grief is weird, isn't it? Sometimes I'm sad, sometimes I'm angry at her for dying, sometimes I'm just numb. I think we give ourselves permission to feel complicated things." We talked for 3 hours about loss and betrayal and the strange process of rebuilding a life you never expected to have to rebuild. When we finally left the coffee shop, he asked if he could see me again. "Maybe we could go for a hike," he suggested. "I know this great trail where the wildflowers are blooming." I said yes. Not because I was ready for a relationship, but because I was ready to not let fear make all my decisions. Robert and I have been dating for 6 months now. We take things slow, really slow. He knows my whole story, and I know his. We don't make assumptions or move in together or talk about the future beyond next weekend's plans. And that's perfect. He's teaching me that not all men are John, that trust can be rebuilt carefully with someone who earns it daily through small actions. That companionship doesn't have to come with control. What I love about Robert is his transparency. On our second date, he showed me his bank statements without me asking. "I want you to know exactly where I stand financially," he said. "No secrets, no surprises." The gesture made me cry. He looked alarmed, thinking he'd done something wrong, but I explained that it was the opposite. He'd done something so right that my body didn't know how to process it. Robert respects my boundaries in ways John never did. When I said I wasn't ready to introduce him to my kids yet, he didn't push. When I told him I needed space to process my feelings, he gave it without making me feel guilty. When I had a panic attack at a restaurant because the waiter reminded me of John, Robert held my hand and asked what I needed rather than telling me what to do. "I'm learning from you," he told me once, "about what it means to really show up for someone. My marriage to Carol was good, but we fell into traditional patterns. I made decisions, she supported them. It worked for us, but I can see now that it wasn't partnership. Not really. With you, I want to do it differently." Before I finish my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this, something that might help you if you're in a similar situation, or if you know someone who is. Financial abuse is one of the least discussed forms of domestic abuse, but it's incredibly common and can be just as devastating as physical abuse. It usually starts small, with one partner taking control of finances in the name of being better with money or wanting to protect the other person from stress. But it escalates. Suddenly you don't have access to bank accounts. or you have to ask permission to spend money, or you're kept in the dark about the family's financial situation. This is about control, not about money management. If your partner refuses to let you see bank statements, if they dismiss your questions about finances, if they make unilateral decisions about large purchases or investments without consulting you, those are red flags. Major red flags. You have a right to know about your own financial situation. You have a right to access accounts with your name on them. You have a right to be an equal partner in financial decisions. If you suspect financial abuse, document everything. Take pictures of statements, save emails, keep a journal. Open your own bank account if you can, even if it's just a small one for now. Build your own credit history. Know what debts are in your name. Understand what assets you legally own versus what your partner claims you own together. Talk to a lawyer who specializes in family law and financial abuse. Many offer free consultations. Join a support group for financial abuse survivors. You'll find resources, friendship, and the crucial knowledge that you're not alone. The National Domestic Violence Hotline has resources for financial abuse, even if there's no physical violence. Call them. They can help you make a safety plan that includes financial protection. Don't let shame keep you silent. I was so ashamed that I'd let this happen, that I'd been so trusting, that I'd ignored warning signs. But shame is a prison we build for ourselves, and you don't deserve to be imprisoned for someone else's betrayal. Here's what I know now, what I wish I could tell my younger self. Financial abuse thrives in silence and isolation. The abuser wants you to feel like you're the only one dealing with this, like you're foolish for not understanding finances, like you should just trust them to handle it. Don't fall for it. You're not stupid. You're being deliberately kept in the dark. That's different, and you're not alone. Studies suggest that financial infidelity affects 40% of couples. 40%. That's nearly half of all relationships having some form of financial deception. You're not special in your suffering. You're part of a huge community of people who've been lied to about money. The difference is whether you stay in denial or choose to face the truth. Facing the truth is terrifying. I won't lie to you about that. It means potentially losing your marriage, your financial security, your vision of the future. But staying in denial means losing yourself, and you're too valuable to lose. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. I know it wasn't easy to hear. Some of you might be listening and seeing pieces of your own life reflected back at you. If that's you, please know that you have options. You have strength you haven't tapped into yet. You have the ability to rebuild, even when it feels impossible. I'm sitting here in my little Phoenix house that's all mine now, painted in colors I chose, filled with art I created, about to go to yoga class with Sandra. My kids are doing okay. I'm doing okay. Better than okay, actually. I found myself again after years of losing myself in someone else's lies. It wasn't the life I planned, but it's mine. And it's good. Really good. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your world. Are you drinking morning coffee or winding down after a long day? Drop your city and time in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, if you felt seen or understood or less alone, please consider hitting that like button. It helps other people find these stories and know they're not alone either. What would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted John earlier? Would you have trusted Michael's revelation right away? Would you have forgiven and tried to work it out? I genuinely want to know your thoughts. Sometimes I still wonder if I made the right choices, if there was another path I didn't see. But then I remember what Rita told me in our first meeting. She said the right choice is the one that protects you and honors your dignity. Everything else is details. If you found value in this story, please subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this, stories of survival and rebuilding and women finding their strength in impossible situations. You're not alone in whatever you're going through. And if my story helped even one person recognize financial abuse and take steps to protect themselves, then sharing it was worth it. Until the next story, take care of your heart. Protect your assets, trust your gut, and remember that you are allowed to put yourself first. You are allowed to walk away from betrayal. You are allowed to rebuild. You're allowed to be happy again. It's not selfish. It's survival. And survival is sacred.